Scene script. Picture this. Australia, 1932. A land down under where everything wants to kill you, including the birds. Now let's take a step back in time to the Great Depression era. Economic instability was the order of the day, and it hit the globe like a freight train. Australia was no exception. Farmers, the backbone of the Aussie economy, were in the throes of hardship. Struggling to make ends meet, they found themselves in a peculiar predicament, one that involved, of all things, emus. Yes, you heard right, emus, those large flightless birds native to Australia. More specifically, around 20,000 of them. Normally, these birds would spend their days leisurely roaming the central regions of Australia. However, in the sweltering summer of 1932, they embarked on a mass migration, driven by a quest for food and water. Their journey led them towards the fertile farmlands of Western Australia. Picture it, a sea of wheat crops, swaying gently in the breeze, a veritable buffet for our feathered friends. Or should I say, feathered foes? Because for the farmers, this was nothing short of an invasion. Their livelihoods were at stake as the emus, in their relentless pursuit of sustenance, began to decimate the crops. The farmers were desperate. They had already been grappling with low wheat prices and the harsh realities of the Great Depression. Now they were faced with an army of avian adversaries threatening to push them over the edge. Imagine their plight. They had wrestled with the unforgiving Australian outback, sown the seeds of their sweat and toil, only to watch helplessly as their hard work was laid to waste by a horde of hungry emus. And so the stage was set for a war the likes of which the world had never seen. Man versus bird. Who would come out on top? Enter our human heroes, or well, our human participants. The Australian government, faced with the emu onslaught, did what any self-respecting government would do when confronted by a mob of menacing birds they called in the military. Yes, you heard me right, the military. It was the kind of decision that could only be made in the halls of governmental power, where the line between genius and madness is often a blurry one. Enter Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. Meredith and his men were dispatched with a clear mission to quell the emu rebellion. And how were they to achieve this? With machine guns, of course. The kind that could mow down an army of men, or in this case, an army of emus. The Lewis guns, as they were called, were famed for their rapid-fire ability, making them the ideal weapon of choice for this peculiar kind of warfare. The initial strategy was simple: find the emus and shoot the emus. Easy, right? Not quite. You see, emus are surprisingly hardy creatures. They can run fast, they're tough, and they're not exactly known for their fear of humans. Plus, there were thousands of them, thousands of big, fast, angry birds. It was like a scene straight out of an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but with more feathers and less Tippi Hedren. And so, with a plan that could only be described as audacious, the men set forth into the vast Australian outback, armed with their trusty Lewis guns and a truckload of optimism. They were about to wage war on an enemy unlike any they had ever faced before, an enemy that didn't play by the usual rules of engagement, an enemy that was, quite literally, a bird brain. With their Lewis guns at the ready, they prepared to take on their feathered foes. It was time for the feathers to fly. Picture this. The Australian outback, a land bristling with life, a land where nature's drum beats the rhythm of survival. It was here, amidst the whispering grasslands, that the first encounters between the emus and the military took place. Who would have thought that these flightless birds, known for their quirky charm, would prove to be such formidable foes? The soldiers, armed to the teeth and brimming with bravado, were in for a surprise. As the first rounds were fired, the emus scattered in a frenzy, their powerful legs propelling them across the rugged terrain at astonishing speeds. The soldiers soon found themselves in a game of cat and mouse, only this time the mice were 6-feet-tall birds with a surprising knack for guerrilla warfare. The soldiers' arsenal designed for human warfare seemed woefully inadequate in the face of these feathered insurgents. Bullets ricocheted off the hard ground, missing their targets more often than not. The emus, with their indomitable spirit, proved to be surprisingly resilient, shrugging off near misses like water off a duck's back. And let's not forget the terrain. The vast open expanse of the outback was a far cry from the structured battlegrounds the soldiers were used to. The emus, on the other hand, were in their element. They used the landscape to their advantage, disappearing into the tall grasses and reappearing at will, leaving the soldiers flummoxed and fatigued. As the days wore on, the soldiers found themselves locked in a war of attrition. They had vastly underestimated their feathered foes, and their initial confidence had given way to frustration and disbelief. But amidst the chaos and the confusion, one thing became abundantly clear. These weren't just birds. They were survivors, embodiments of the raw, untamed spirit of the outback. And they weren't going down without a fight. As it turns out, birds are hard to kill when they can run up to 30 miles per hour. But the tide was about to turn, or was it? The military, feeling the pressure of the relentless emu onslaught, knew they needed to switch gears. The feathered forces were proving to be far more formidable than anyone had expected. So the brass, in all their infinite wisdom, decided to bring in the big guns, literally. They mounted machine guns onto trucks, a strategy that was sure to tip the scales in their favor. The trucks roared into the battlefield, kicking up dust and turning heads, both human and emu. The emus, displaying their uncanny knack for survival, quickly adapted. They mastered the art of evasion, scattering just in time to avoid the hail of bullets. It was like a bizarre game of duck, duck, emu. Meanwhile, on the home front, public reaction was, well, mixed. Some found the whole thing hilarious, a bizarre footnote in an otherwise drab year. Others were less amused. They saw it as a waste of resources, a futile effort against an enemy that seemed to have an endless supply of reinforcements. The newspapers were filled with headlines like, "Emus outwit humans," and "Feathered foes foil forces." The government officials were not laughing. The emus were not just a nuisance, they were a threat to the agricultural economy. The military continued its campaign, but the emus proved to be a formidable enemy. Their numbers didn't seem to dwindle, their resolve didn't seem to waver. The soldiers, hardened by the battle, began to respect their feathered foes. They marveled at their resilience, their tenacity, their sheer will to live. It was almost inspiring in a bizarre, bird-brained kind of way. But despite the change in strategy, despite the resources poured into this unconventional war, the emus remained, well, MUN, to defeat. The tide had turned, but not in the way everyone had hoped. The emus were still standing, still fighting, still surviving. Despite their best efforts, the emus remained, well, MUN to defeat. All wars must come to an end, even wars against birds. As the sun set on the Great Emu War of 1932, so too did the military intervention. The soldiers, weary from their battle against the feathered invaders, packed their bags and their Lewis guns, leaving the battleground to the victorious emus and the beleaguered farmers. But just because the soldiers had left didn't mean the war was over, not for the farmers. The emus, unimpressed by the humans' attempts to quell them, continued to ravage the farmlands, munching their way through crops and leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The farmers were left to pick up the pieces and figure out how to save their livelihoods from the relentless beaks of their avian adversaries. In the aftermath of the military fiasco, the government tried to help the farmers, offering a bounty for every emu beak brought in. But even that wasn't enough. The emus were too many, too fast, and too cunning. The farmers needed another solution, and so they turned to the one thing that had always been their ally, science. With the help of agricultural researchers, they discovered a new method of protecting their crops. They started using a special type of fencing designed to keep the emus out without harming them. It was a simple, elegant solution to a problem that had once seemed insurmountable. The emus, for their part, seemed to accept this new arrangement. They moved on to greener pastures, leaving the farmers in peace. The war had ended not in a climactic battle, but in a quiet understanding between man and bird. As the dust settled, the farmers breathed a sigh of relief. They had survived the Great Emu War. They had faced down an enemy unlike any other and come out the other side. They had learned in the most unusual way possible that sometimes the answer isn't to fight, but to adapt. And so the Great Emu War ended, not with a bang, but with a whimper. But what happens after a war with birds? After the dust settled and the last feather fell, the Great Emu War of 1932 left an indelible mark on the Australian landscape. It was a war that pitted man against bird, and to the surprise of many, the birds held their own. The immediate aftermath was a period of reflection and documentation. The numbers were surprising. 986 emus had been killed and around 2,500 emus were wounded. 0 human casualties, however. Meanwhile, farmers surveyed their battered fields, soldiers their bruised egos. Stories began to circulate, tales of emus charging like cavalry, dodging bullets like seasoned soldiers. The emus with their long necks and curious eyes were no longer just birds. They were adversaries, worthy of respect and, oddly enough, a bit of admiration. As the years went by, the war subtly weaved its way into the fabric of Australian society, becoming part of the nation's unique folklore. It morphed from a military operation into a humorous anecdote, told at barbecues and family gatherings. It was, after all, a tale too absurd to be forgotten. School children would learn about it in history class, their eyes wide with disbelief. "We fought a war against birds and killed 986 of them?" they'd ask, their laughter echoing through the classroom. Adults would chuckle at the memory, shaking their heads at the audacity of it all. And the emus, well, they carried oblivious to their status as war veterans. In popular culture, the Emu War has been satirized, romanticized, and everything in between. It's been subject of comedy sketches, songs, and even a feature film. It's become a symbol of the Aussie spirit, a testament to their resilience and their ability to find humor in the face of adversity. But beneath the laughter, a deeper message. The Emu War serves as a reminder of our relationship with nature, of the challenges that arise when we fail to respect it. It's a testament to the power of the natural world and a warning against underestimating it. And so the Great Emu War of 1932 remains a feather in the cap of Australian history, a tale of man's struggle against nature, and a reminder that sometimes birds just don't care about your problems. So what have we learned from all of this? In the heart of 1932, amidst the dust and heat of the Australian outback, humanity and emus clashed in a conflict as absurd as it was real. In this bizarre chapter of history, we've seen military strategies pitted against avian adversaries. We've witnessed the feathered foes outmaneuvering our finest, causing chaos in their wake and leaving us to question the very fabric of reality. In a turn of events that would have been comedic, if not so perplexing, the emus emerged victorious. Yes, you heard that right. The emus. The lesson here isn't about military tactics, nor about the resilience of the Australian farmer. It's about the unpredictability of life, and the humor that often hides in its most unexpected corners. And the moral of our story? Remember, when life gives you emus, don't start a war. They're tougher than they look.